It, no, don't say that. But one I'm kind of, but one of, but there's a little bit more depth there. Some not cliff notes. There. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather and as always I'm reading with a vengeance and I hope you are too. How is everybody doing? I hope everybody is having a good summer. I think I'm having a pretty good summer. Of course, I am coming from southern Georgia where it is currently hot as balls, but I love the heat. I don't know about you, but I absolutely love the heat. As long as I can get some relief from it, I enjoy it most of the time. I have been doing quite a bit of reading, and of course, that's why we're here. I promised another wrap up, and that's what I'm going to do in this video. I'm going to talk about what I've been reading. I got a little behind in my wrap ups with my trip, and then of course some family drama that happened earlier this year, which you all know about. So I have about 7 or 8 books to talk to you about. So let's just get into it. The first book I want to talk to you about, I'm kind of going in chronological order here, is Quietly Hostile by Samantha Irby. This is a collection of essays. I read her Wow, No, Thank You. That was my first Samantha Irby. I enjoyed it okay. Her essays in Wow, No, Thank You focused on turning 40 and all that entails, and really kind of getting started in her career, specifically writing for Hollywood, for shows and stuff like that. I loved Wow, No, Thank You. This one focuses still on getting older and what her life has been like since she's become successful writing for Hollywood. And there are a couple of other kind of random essays about random things, but I found there was a lot of bodily function and bodily fluid humor in this one, like a lot of it. That and masturbation humor, a lot of it. You know, some of it was funny, but then it just kind of got over the top and it just kind of grossed me out. And it's for that reason that it took me several months to get through these essays. Usually, you know, I don't typically keep a book of essays by my bed and maybe I pick it up once in a while. Usually if I pick up a book, regardless if it's a collection of short stories or essays, I like to read it like a regular book. But this one, I think the content forced me to pick it up randomly over a longer period of time. So I didn't really enjoy this one as much as I did Wow, No, Thank You. There was an essay, a random essay about Sex and the City, what she would have done differently to specific episodes. And I have never been a Sex and the City fan. I never found the humor. I never found the drama very engaging. I didn't find it relatable. I didn't enjoy that essay. And there were a couple of funny parts. If you're a huge fan of Samantha Irby, I'm not going to steer you away from it. She's funny. She knows how to write and she's honest and just super open about everything. And that I appreciate. But there's certain things I just don't need to hear about. The other thing is I read the physical copy of it, and Wow, No, Thank You, I listened to it, and she narrates it, and her humor just comes through so much better when you're listening to her tell her stories. I mean, obviously, right? This one just was a little lacking for me. I'll still read her other stuff. I think I have Meaty on my shelves somewhere. I was glad to get through it, but hopefully Meaty's better. Next, I read The Queen of Dirt Island by Donal Ryan. This is historical fiction, Irish literature. This one came onto my radar because it was nominated for the Booktube prize this year. Once the nominations came out, of course, I read the synopsis of every single book on there so that I can properly pick the ones that I wanted to move forward. Anyways, this one I added to my TBR. I listened to this one and it is narrated by an Irish narrator, and I don't know if I've mentioned it on this channel before, but anytime I listen to a book narrated by an Irish person, it almost elevates the story because I can listen to that accent and just anything that is said just comes across as a better story because of the accent. I know that's ridiculous and completely irrational, but I can't help it. But this one was genuinely a good story, and I definitely recommend it. This one follows 4 generations of Irish women, strong women during the 80s in a rural community in Ireland. The story opens up with the birth of Saoirse, and her mother, Eileen, are on their way home from the hospital with Eileen's husband, Saoirse's father, and Eileen's father-in-law, I don't even remember his name, and they get into a car accident, and the 2 men are killed. And Saoirse and Eileen move in with Eileen's mother-in-law, Mary, also known as Nana or Nana. And most of the story really just kind of follows the 3 women and the trials and tribulations that they deal with. Saoirse's coming of age, her understanding of the world as seen through the eyes of her mother and grandmother, and it's affected by her close relationship with these 2 women. And I know I mentioned this follows 4 generations. It's really the 3, but the 4th generation is Saoirse's daughter, who is born towards the end of the story, and you don't really get to know Pearl. Her birth at the end does kind of bring the story full circle. And mentioning that, this story, it really is about beginnings and endings and conflicts and opposites. I mean, we have cruelty and compassion and joy and despair, fragility and strength. And this whole story is just really filled with all those things. And there's a lot going on in this story, but the core of it really is the strength of these women and how they get along. And the enjoyment that I got out of this story, besides the story itself, was the dialogue these women had with each other. They absolutely adored each other, but they were constantly yelling at each other and snipping at each other with that dry Irish wit that is just so enjoyable to listen to. And I gotta say, this author, I thought it was a woman. He writes women so well. He doesn't pull any punches. He's honest, but he doesn't put them on pedestals either. He just did a really, really good job writing these characters. He writes men in not a great light. None of the men in this story fare very well. They're either weak or dumb or sinister, but it wasn't with the feeling that, you know, all men are this way. It's just these particular characters are written this way, I think, to just show the additional strength that these women have. Anyways, I really enjoyed this one. I would recommend it, specifically if you like Irish literature. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook. It just gives that much authenticity to the story. The next book I want to talk to you about is kind of a surprise and kind of not a surprise. I attempted to read The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. I didn't think I would ever attempt to read anything else by this author after being traumatized by American Psycho many, many years ago. But this one also was put on my radar because of the Booktube prize. And the synopsis sounded actually quite intriguing. And I listened to it, at least I attempted to listen to it, and it is narrated by the author. I think that was a mistake by the author, and I'll tell you why in a second. So the synopsis of this one is you're in 1980s, early 80s Los Angeles. You're following a group of teenage friends, or about 17 years old, their senior year of high school. Most of them are quite privileged, wealthy families. I want to say even the high school is a private high school, and you're following them through life and their parties and their get-togethers and all that. And meanwhile, while a serial killer is targeting teenagers in Los Angeles. The main character is Brett, and the story is told in first person from Brett's perspective. This is, I think, like auto fiction, very similarly to Ruth Ozecki's A Tale for the Time Being. And it's another one where I mentioned with Ozecki's book that it's kind of distracting when you have a fictional character that is named after the author and has similarities to the author. I mean, I get the concept of autofiction, but I don't think it's a writing style or writing technique that's for me. But anyways, if you haven't guessed it already, I DNF this. I don't even know how long I gave it. I want to say I listened to a couple of hours. Now, first of all, the author narrating the audiobook was a mistake because he comes off as so smug. I don't know if that was intentional to kind of give the reader an idea of the basic attitude of these privileged white teenagers in early 80s LA, or if that's just the author. Either way, I didn't like it. The main reason I DNF'd it was the sheer volume of graphic sex that this kid was having with boys, with girls, all the time. And had I finished the book, and it's probably, I think it's a 500-page book, had I finished the book and there was that much sex that I read in just the first couple of hours in the entirety of the book, I would have thought it was too much. And just so graphic. It was just too much. I was grossed out by it, really. I would say the only thing I enjoyed about this book was the 80s references. And that's part of what attracted me to the book, was that it took place in the 80s and then that it was going to be a serial killer murder mystery thriller. And by the time I DNF'd it, 2 or 3 hours into it, we hadn't even gotten to the serial killer part. So yeah, I couldn't do it anymore. I really wanted to give this author another try, and I did, but I just don't think he's for me. Maybe I would have had better luck with it had I read the physical copy, because his way of reading his story just grated my nerves. Have any of you read this book? Is the serial killer thriller mystery part of this book worth reading it? Should I just pick up the physical copy and read it? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Anyways, that's my one and only DNF that I'll have for this video. Next up, I read Lies and Weddings by Kevin Kwan. Now, this is Kwan's latest book, and it's not a book I would typically pick up, but I picked it up for a couple of reasons. My boss at work, Jenny, she recommended it to me, and she said she absolutely loved it. She said it was the perfect summer read, and she gave it to me to read for my trip to Paris with my mom, and she said it was absolutely perfect, just kind of a fun ride, nothing really to think about. And so I took it on my trip. And the other reason I decided to read it, she had asked me if I had read any of his books, if I read Crazy Rich Asians. Rich Crazy Asians? The Asians who are rich and crazy? I don't remember. But yes, I had. Years ago I read it, and she asked me if I liked it. And honestly, I couldn't remember, but I don't remember hating it. And I know I finished it, so I didn't DNF it. So I said, yeah, I think I liked it. So I took the book, and it's an ARC. I got to take the physical copy ARC home. And then I looked up Goodreads, and I gave Crazy, the other book, 2 stars. So I was wondering how I would feel about this book, but I read it. I did enjoy it. I mean, I enjoyed it okay. It was fun. It was fluff. However, I think it's disguised as fluff, but Kwan always has something to say about privilege and excess, and he does a really good job at that. But the thing of it is his commentary on excess kind of rubs me the wrong way. So when I'm reading a story and every little thing is described down to a T, like everything that everybody is wearing, the color, the cut, the fabric, the brand name specifically, and not just the clothes, but the jewelry, the furniture in the room, the architecture, everything is described. Everything in every scene is described in minute detail. And here and there is fine because you get kind of a vibe, the atmosphere, and that's great. But I think he goes a little overboard, and it's intentional because we are following a group of very, very rich people, royalty actually. You can't really get away from the brand names and the excess and all of that. But really the story here is, I mean, it was a good one. It is a romance, not my favorite genre, but one I'm kind of warming up to. But there's a little bit more to this story than just romance. You're following Rufus, who is the Earl of whatever village, township. He is the son of other royals, and he is best friends with his neighbor Eden. They grew up together because Eden's dad is the family doctor. Eden and her dad are not royal, but they are somewhat close to the family because of him being their doctor. Rufus's mom is very, very much invested in who Rufus marries. Has to be the perfect person. And so she is trying to set him up with these women that he is absolutely not interested in. he basically is not really interested in his life in the royal family. He would rather live in a hut, really, really nice hut, on a beach in Hawaii and do his art. I can't remember, is he a photographer? I can't remember what kind of art he does, but he's very artistic, and that's the life he wants to lead. Meanwhile, Eden has followed in her dad's footsteps, and she is a doctor as well. As the story progresses, we find out that Rufus is starting to have more serious feelings about Eden, and shenanigans ensue. So there's some humor here as well. There's family secrets that has to do with Eden and her dad. There's some conflict and tension when Rufus's mom finds out that Rufus has feelings for Eden, and I think she construes it as Eden trying to trap Rufus, and so that was kind of a fun storyline too. I will say, and I keep meaning to look in the finished copy at work if there were the same footnotes that were in the ARC, and I don't even know the point of these footnotes, but there were a lot of footnotes in the ARC, and I wish I had figured out if it was in the finished copy before doing this video, because I would like to explain it to you. But there were a lot of footnotes. Like, I would say 70% of the pages had footnotes on them. And then also, every time you met a character for the first time, there were parentheses after their name, and it gave a list of where they went to school specifically, like from grade school all the way up to postgraduate. I'm really not sure what that was about, but that kind of got annoying too. So, a fun story, but there were just aspects to it that I didn't really care for, that just was distracting and annoying for me, but the story was a decent one. There was a bit of a twist at the end that was enjoyable. It was easily readable. He is a good writer. I don't really think his content is something that I would gravitate towards, but if this sounds like something that you would enjoy, I would recommend it because it is well written, it is a fun story, and I'm glad that I read it. Thank you, Jenny. Next up, I read You'd Look Better as a Ghost by Joanna Wallace. This one popped up as a free download on one of my apps. I think I have a Penguin Random House app, or it might have been on Libro FM. I can't remember, but it was free, it was short, it looked appealing, so I listened to it, and it was okay. I do have to say that there were some laugh out loud moments, but I do remember finishing it and just thinking, okay, yeah, that was pretty good. So I didn't love it. This one follows Claire, who is a British woman who is trying to get her art career off the ground. And I believe the story opens with the funeral of her father, and she is going to a bereavement support group, I think weekly. Oh, and a little tidbit about Claire, she is a part-time serial killer. So this is a dark humor mystery novel. So towards the beginning of the book, Claire is, I think, applying to some kind of art school or art showing. It would be something that would help boost her career, and she gets an email back saying, oh, congratulations, you have been accepted into this program. And then that email is quickly followed up by another email saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I sent this to the wrong Claire. And the email is written in such a way that it's kind of dismissive and not as apologetic as Claire thinks it should be. So Claire decides to kind of plan a get together with this guy who sent this email, and things don't go well for that guy. But the mystery of the book is, during this whole scenario where Claire hunts this guy down and ultimately kills him, it's not a spoiler, it happens very early on, somebody is watching her this whole time and starts to blackmail her. And that's where the mystery is, and that story goes from there. But there's a little bit more depth to the story. It's a dual timeline. You're going back and forth from the present and back to when Claire was a child and her relationship with her awful mother. Awful to the point of not really believable. I mean, just she came across as something out of a Roald Dahl novel, just evil witchery. And of course, I think that's meant to explain Claire becoming a serial killer. I felt like that could have used a little bit more depth if I were to split hairs. But ultimately, this story was a fun one. There was some humor, but it's very, very dark. And if you don't like dark humor, you might not like this. There is a twist in it. Of course, any book that has a twist in it, I enjoy. Yeah, this one was okay. Well, it was a little bit more than okay. It was enjoyable. I think you kind of have to suspend disbelief to really enjoy this story because it is out there. There's a lot of elements of this story that are way out there. So just keep that in mind. But if you're looking for a fun, dark comic mystery, you might enjoy this one. The next book I want to talk to you about, you will be shocked to find out, is a classic. I read Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. Now, I picked this up. I've actually wanted to read Peter Pan for a long time, but this one I read specifically for our staff book club that we have at work, and one of the other booksellers picked this one to read, and I was very happy to be given that extra urge to read this book. I love this edition. It's a beautiful cover. I think it's gorgeous, and it's got these folded, I can't remember what this is called, but I love this type of edition. And then inside it's got all the hooks, which is super cute. Here's what I'll say about Peter Pan. I don't think I need to go into what it's about, but to read the original story, I was really kind of surprised by some things. This is a much darker story than I had expected. A lot darker themes going on in here than the Disney Peter Pan that we're all used to. So being surprised by the dark themes in this book, I would say that was the thing that I kind of enjoyed the most about reading this story. I will admit, though, there were many times I was kind of bored, and I think it's mostly to do with that the whole writing style and vernacular of the time that this book was written, that many books are written, that many classics are written, and that takes away the enjoyment of reading classics for me. But I am glad I read the original story. There are obviously some similarities that run through all the versions, the movies, the musicals, the plays, the retellings. And so I always appreciate reading the root of a story that has endured through the ages and has had so many different iterations and retellings. So I am glad I read it, and it's short too. It was 150 pages. The other thing I enjoyed about this story is there were some footnotes throughout, not a whole lot, maybe one or two per chapter, where you can go and read. For instance, in chapter 1, when you're introduced to Wendy, you are directed to the footnote at the end that says, Wendy. The name Wendy was not used prior to the debut of Barrie's play in 1904. Barrie made up the name in tribute to his friend W.E. Henley's young daughter, Margaret, who died at age 6. Margaret had been unable to pronounce Friendy, so instead she called Barrie her Fwendy. I thought that was kind of interesting, and there's probably 24 of those little tidbits that inspired Barrie and led to the characters in this story. So that was enjoyable too. Again, I'm glad I read it. If you're a reader of the classics, you would probably very much enjoy this if you haven't read it already. I just feel very accomplished that I have another classic that I've read. The next book I want to talk to you about is Shark Heart by Emily Haybeck. This is one that I picked and added to my TBR based solely on the cover. Well, not solely on the cover, but this cover is beautiful. And then I did read the synopsis, and the synopsis did sound very intriguing. Very intriguing. Has kind of a science fiction element to it. Science fiction fantasy element. Sometimes it's hard to differentiate the line between the two. So this is considered a love story. And we live in our world, but the one difference is there is kind of, I wouldn't say so much a disease as a condition that is genetic, and it skips generations, but this condition is that a transformation from human into an animal, and it's different for everybody. And in this story, we follow Lewis and Wren, and not very long after they get married, Lewis gets diagnosed with this condition, and he slowly over time starts to turn into a great white shark. And the story follows Lewis and Wren as they deal with the obstacles that this entails. Now, there were parts of this story that I enjoyed. I thought the writing was skilled. I didn't feel incredibly connected to the characters though. And I really thought that there was going to be more to the mutation part of the story and how it affected Lewis and Wren's relationship with each other, and not only with each other, but theirs together, kind of against the world. And it didn't really spend a whole lot of time. In fact, I don't know how far into the story I was when this happened, because I actually listened to the audio of this. And there's more about that I want to say in just a minute. But partway through the story, we end part 1 and go to part 2. And part 2, you are following Wren's mother and her story. And it's a very, very long part of the book. And I enjoyed following, was her name Anna? But we follow her story. As much as I enjoyed that story, I didn't feel like it was connected to Lewis and Wren's story per se, other than it being Wren's mom. If sometime in the future I am reminded of Wren's mom's story, I don't think I would connect it with Shark Heart, the book. It was so separate. I don't understand what the author was doing there. There was also another part of the book that I wasn't quite understanding the reason behind, and that is it would automatically like break away from a regular narrative text in a book to a script format where it would have the name of the character speaking, colon, and what they say, and then like movie or play direction, kind of like fade to black or enter left or something like that. And I'm not quite certain what the point of that was either. I know that Lewis was, I believe, some kind of professor, teacher, and he was putting on a stage play. But still, I didn't understand why the structure of the book had to change like that, in that way. So yeah, there were parts of this book that I liked. There was a lot that I didn't like. It didn't go the direction that I was hoping for, that initially got me excited for this story. You know, the whole mutation into another animal and how it affects a couple's love story and their lives. I mean, it did a little bit, but just not enough. It wasn't the focal point of the story. So I was a little disappointed by this one. If you read this book, if you decide to read this book, if you have this on your shelf already, definitely read the physical copy, especially with the two, actually multiple structures that it has. It'll be easier to follow. And then also towards the end of the book, where Lewis is completely a shark and he's in the ocean, he's by himself, he meets another shark who was once a human who mutated like him, and they kind of become friends. The voices that the narrator gave these sharks was ridiculous. It was very sing-songy, and all I could think about was Dory from Finding Nemo. It was ridiculous, and not any kind of voice that I would imagine a great white shark having. I expect Bruce from Finding Nemo. Was it Finding Nemo? I think that was Bruce, right? Anyways, the voices were ridiculous, but other than that, am I glad I read it? Of course I'm glad I read it. I mean, like I said, there were parts that I liked. It just wasn't what I was hoping for. If you were hoping for kind of the same thing I was, maybe I will save you some time. But I don't want to discourage anybody from reading a story. There were interesting aspects to it. I don't know. Maybe it was just over my head. I think that kind of is what happens for me when literary fiction and science fiction fantasy try to meld. Then it might just be a me thing. Finally, the last book I will talk to you about is Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier. Now, I gave a little bit, very, very small review because this book featured in my top 5 favorite books of the second quarter of the year, which I will link down below. It was the last video that I think I uploaded. Anyway, so if you watch that video, you already know a little bit about this book, and you already know that I really enjoyed it. I like this author so much. It's going to be an author that I will read her entire backlist. She can write a dark thriller, let me just tell you. So Things We Do in the Dark, it follows Paris, and the story opens up with Paris being arrested for her husband's murder. And you as the reader find it very difficult to believe that she didn't murder her husband, because she is found next to her husband's body, covered in blood, holding the murder weapon. To make matters even more interesting is Paris doesn't even know if she's the one who murdered her husband or not. We're following Paris as she is defending herself against this murder charge, but at the same time, we are learning backstory about Paris and her husband, how they met, how they ended up being married, considering that Paris's husband is 30 years older than her. He's loaded. He's a famous comedian, Hollywood comedian who's been around for a really long time. Paris, who is successful in her own right, she comes from much more humble means. She owns her own yoga studio. And while she's perfectly capable of taking care of herself, a lot of people, of course, assume that Paris married Jimmy for his money. So we're finding out all of that backstory. We also are following the story of Paris has been receiving some letters from somebody who I will not mention. I don't want to spoil anything, obviously, but the letters say, I know you are not who you say you are. You owe me money, and I know you are married to a rich guy, and I want millions of dollars, or I'm going to tell the world who you really are. And so we're following that story. Meanwhile, we're following Paris's history as well as somebody else's history from 15 years prior. And it's all connected, and you think you know what direction it's going, and it goes a different direction. It's just a fun ride. I had such a good time with this book. I could not put it down. I wanted to know who was who and what was going on, and this author just did not let me down. And let me tell you, my standard was held high, because the only other book I read by this author is Jar of Hearts, and that's one of my favorite mystery thrillers. So this one was super fun. It didn't disappoint, and I will be reading everything that she has to offer. I'm not a big fan of trigger warnings, but I just will tell you that there are some dark themes to this story with sexual abuse, parental abuse. So if you don't like to read about any of that, then just be warned. But if you like a good mystery thriller with a good solid twist, I highly recommend Jennifer Hillier. If not this one, then Jar of Hearts. In fact, don't take it from me. I actually read this for the mystery book club that we have through work, and we had one of the bigger crowds show up for the book club meeting, and everybody, I want to say there were about 20 people there, all loved this book. Really, really enjoyed it. So I thought that was a pretty good turnout for a book club where everybody likes the book. So that says something. So yeah, if you're looking for a good mystery thriller for the summer, pick this one up. You will not be disappointed. So that's it for the books that I'm going to wrap up in this video. Just, I guess, to give you a glimpse into my next wrap-up video, I am currently listening to The Ferryman by Justin Cronin, and I am reading Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I believe this was recommended to me by Sarah, because of after raving about Book Lovers by Emily Henry, it was recommended that I try this author. And then after I finish this one, I will be picking up Elif Shafak's new one. It doesn't come out till August, so I'm reading the arc, and that is There Are Rivers in the Sky. So that's what's coming up next. So those will be featured in my next wrap-up video. So that is it. Those are all the books for this time around. Have you read any of these books? What did you think about them? I would love to hear your thoughts on any of them, if we agreed, if we disagreed. All opinions matter. And if not these books, what are you guys reading right now? What are you loving? What is on your summer TBR? I would love to hear about it. Or you can just say hi down in the doodly-doo. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.